It's about history, policy, and impact. A new perspective on current affairs, bringing experience, insight, civility, and scholarship to the urgent issues of today. It's about our past, present, and future. Your host, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, Douglas Blackman. From the University of Virginia's Miller Center, this is American Forum.
Welcome back to the Miller Center's American Forum. I'm Doug Blackman. Joining us is ANN COMPTON, the broadcast journalist who until recently was, for more than 40 years, not only the voice, but eyes and ears of ABC News at the White House. She covered the presidency and America and its politics through an era of extraordinary change for the office of the president and the role of media in American life. The first president on her watch was Gerald Ford in the dark aftermath of Watergate. She stayed at the White House through a total of 7 presidents, covered 10 presidential campaigns, observed the commander-in-chief through 2 difficult wars in the Persian Gulf and Afghanistan, watched presidents grapple with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the opening of the Berlin Wall, and she was the only broadcast reporter on board Air Force One with President George W. Bush on September 11, 2001. And on the eve of national voting in 2008, she conducted one of the very last interviews with Barack Obama before his historic election as our first African-American president. What a career.
It's quite an arc of history.
It is. Thanks for making some time for us.
Thank you.
The span of your time at the White House really is profoundly remarkable. I think in particular that when you arrived, it had only been 5-6 years since the first presidential election in which a substantial number of African Americans had been allowed to vote in the South, and then you remain at the White House until the time that there's actually an African American man sitting in the Oval Office.
To be able to see that kind of arc, not only domestic politics and how the electorate changed, how it grew, how the way that we tell presidential election and policy stories have changed, and of course to see the age of the presidents. They were so old when I started, and Barack Obama's the youngest president I've covered. He's the only one who was younger than I was. Now at the other end of that tunnel, having been there in Washington for 40 years, and I have a pretty good institutional memory, it strikes me how very much the same the White House is. It still runs with the same kind of clockwork precision. There are still the paces of the year, that you have the budget that you have to do, you have the State of the Union address, and 4 years, as any governor or president can tell you, is a short time to get done all of those things on those laundry lists of campaign promises.
So there are all the obstacles and dilemmas that are faced by the presidents remain the same. The office remains, the to-do list, as I think some president has said in recent times, is
Doug,
often the same.
I have to ask, what genius would really want a second term as president? I covered Gerald Ford, who didn't get a second term. Actually, I covered Jimmy Carter, who didn't get a second term. However, 21 years later, he goes down. Many people say he's the best ex-president, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize 21 years after leaving the White House. Ronald Reagan got a second term, weighted down by Iran-Contra. George Herbert Walker Bush did not get a second term, and now he's the most popular ex-president, jumping out of airplanes at age 90. His son, George W. Bush, got 2 terms. The second term weighted down with 2 wars and an economy that quite literally fell off a cliff. So I did ask Barack Obama, are you sure about this re-election thing? I don't think second terms are any fun at all.
What did he tell you?
He wants a second term. Yeah.
When you went to the White House, though, what was the context of that? We're in 1974. We're at the height of talk about what was then called women's liberation.
Yeah.
Was the network? Was there pressure on ABC to be open to the idea of having a woman at the White House?
I didn't understand it at the time, but there was tremendous pressure on broadcasters, which have to have a federal license to be on the nation's airwaves. Newspapers don't need to get a permit from the federal government to print. broadcasters do need a permit to use those airwaves. And I came to the White House in '74. In 1977, there were still not a lot of women out there. And the U.S. Civil Rights Commission did a report called Window Dressing, saying the few women are out there and the few blacks who are on the air are but window dressing, that the media still has not brought diversity. And it strikes me when I sit in the White House press room now in the year 2014, or sit on Air Force One, or even at a White House Correspondents Association seminar in October of 2014, the crowd is almost all white. Very few African American reporters happen to be assigned to the White House. However, women now make up very often fully half of those who are in the audience or who are filling up that front row for the press secretary's daily briefing.
Yeah, so there's been real change. So how did you feel back in 1977 being called a drapery?
Honestly, I was too busy to pay any attention because it was a tremendously active time. And the thing about covering the White House, people say, well, where are we in history? When I cover the White House, I am the ABC foot soldier. I have to know every nuance, every little quote the president said, how that matches with what he said yesterday, what he promised to do the day before. And I tell people that I don't see the forest. I don't see the trees. All I see is the bark. And I don't think covering the White House day in, day out for that long a period of time gave me the perspective that I would have had I gone in for a couple of years and then moved on to something more prestigious like, a column in the New York Times or a public television anchor job. I think it was still, up to the very last day I was in the White House, it was still my job to be the resident expert on what we needed to know from this president. Not only could I look when I came in early in the morning during times of war, and at 4:30 in the morning, I knew which light was the president's bathroom, and he was up. That meant he had been on the phone to the Situation Room and something bad was happening. I knew that if there's a Marine standing outside the West Wing lobby door, it meant the president is in the West Wing and usually in the Oval Office. And I'd also know you can read the body language of a president. When something's wrong, when something is, when he's distracted, when he doesn't seem that he's giving a speech, but he's phoning it in. All of those are signs that a reporter uses to try to put together a bigger picture and explain to the audience a bigger idea of what in the world is really going on here.
Fascinating too that from that tumultuous period that when you're first coming into politics, it looks in so many ways like the one we're in now, where dissatisfaction across the board, division across the government. I mean, there was a lot of discussion in that period of time about the toxicity of politics and that it was more toxic than it had ever been before. A lot of reminders to the president.
People were kind of sour on Washington, and they were sour on Jimmy Carter, who had been a governor who came in from the outside. Ronald Reagan came along with this sunny optimism at a time when inflation, the misery index that he kept hammering Jimmy Carter with, that Americans were tired of what they had. It also came at a time, Doug, when there were Americans held hostage in Iran, and the Carter administration couldn't seem to bring that to a conclusion. They tried a rescue attempt, which ended in disaster, Desert One. And so Americans, I think, are by their nature pretty optimistic. And I think in that year, it helped to come from outside of Washington, just as maybe it also helped Barack Obama in 2008 to be someone who was not tied up with the current administration. And he got the nomination from Hillary Clinton during the Democratic primaries when they both won about 18 million votes in the primaries. Hillary Clinton said there are 18 million cracks in the glass ceiling, but she couldn't go that last mile and snag the nomination.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's Morning in America and Hope and Change. Those are pretty similar kinds of messages for a stressed nation.
And a stressed nation looks for that. And of course, for reporters, what we're looking for is change. What we're looking for is it's really true being out there on the campaign. You listen to the audiences, you listen to who applauds, you listen to what they gripe about, you look at the polls to see. My favorite line in all of the polls that we do every year, every season, every level of government. When the pollster says, do you think the government is on the right track? Do you think the country is headed in the right direction? When those numbers start to tank, as they certainly did in the 2014 midterm elections, as they have in other elections, the American people are saying, stop it. We have to try something new.
I'm often surprised in the present at how rarely, and frankly, particularly in the most recent elections, it surprised me that the Democrats, in this big retreat away from a president whose popularity ratings have gone down, end up not talking much about, one, what a great country we live in a tangible way, and two, the things that actually probably were a better case for the Democrats than the one that got presented.
There's a lot of talk in Washington, though, about the kind of dysfunction of actually getting policy done. And that has changed dramatically since that, either the Ford race in 1976 or the Reagan victory in 1980. Because back in those days, those who went to Congress, and I did spend 4 years, the second Reagan term, on Capitol Hill when my good friend Charlie Gibson had to go to New York and anchor Good Morning America. I found a couple of things about going up in 1984 that folks on Capitol Hill came to work on Tuesday mornings, went home on Thursday nights, took 5 weeks off for Christmas, and 10 days for the 4th of July. It was so easy. I had a third baby. Well, it was a very family-friendly schedule. But it came but back then, the Republicans and Democrats who led the two sides in Congress, whether it was the Republican Senate, which came in with Reagan, whether it was the longtime Democratic hold on the House, they did manage to get things done. I think now, since 2000, probably since 2000, Congress has been less and less likely to move on much of anything. Part of it, maybe because most members of Congress leave their families at home, keep their kids in school there, move and stay in Animal House bachelor pads on Capitol Hill, and they don't have the same personal connection with other members of Congress.
What's it like to have watched a figure like a president, say Jimmy Carter, as long as you did, as closely as you did, studying the bark on the tree that whole time, and then in the blink of an eye, just becomes a regular citizen again? What's it like to watch that? What do you see happen in the eyes of that figure?
Presidents usually take it hard. Their wives take it a lot harder. And I remember watching, had traveled in on Air Force One with President and Mrs. Bush when George Herbert Walker Bush came into Houston the last night of the campaign. And I was standing right at the edge of the stage down in the orchestra pit when they had a big final rally in his hometown, Houston. And Lee Greenwood was singing God Bless the USA or something like that. And there were the Oak Ridge Boys, all the people that, that really just adored George Herbert Walker Bush. And I looked up and I saw Barbara Bush, who was always such a realist. We could all see the polls. We all knew where the next day was going. And she reached over and grabbed his hand. And she looked up at President Bush and she said, "It's over." And so the family knew kind of where to. And I think there was a time when she was relieved, but she took it hard. Nobody wants to see their loved one rejected. Another one who took it hard was George W. Bush.
I assume it's not implausible that you might have developed with at least some of the first ladies a particular kind of relationship.
Well, I think being a woman reporter really kind of helped with that. There were print reporters around, but for television, when there were none around, I traveled all the time with Betty Ford. Let me tell you something. Here's a woman who had been a congressional wife. Her husband was out 250 days a year campaigning for other people. So she decided that she was going to be a first lady and she was going to speak her mind. And I went all over the country with her. She campaigned for the Equal Rights Amendment, something her husband, the President of the United States, did not support. She had a CB radio license and loved to get on, talk to the trucker convoys.
What was her handle?
Well, I was with her the night she chose it. And she had been a modern dancer in her youth until she had some back problems. And she wanted to be called Native Dancer, which of course was the name of a famous racehorse, right? But we're out in the middle of the country somewhere, and she's calling back to Washington. She says, "Can you make sure native dancer was female, not male. But it was fun to cover somebody who said what she thought. Another one that was fun to cover was Laura Bush, because we're about the same age, and we both had kids who were the same age, applying to colleges at the same time. They'd actually, for a while the Bushes lived in Washington, gone to Sunday school together. And I think all of us who, have families that are being brought along in the limelight as well. I think we, especially those of us who sympathized with the mom, had a kind of connection and understanding with Hillary Clinton, whose daughter, Chelsea's the same age as my oldest son, Bill. The two Bush twins, same age as my son, Ted. The Gore kids and the Quayle kids were in school with my kids. So I think there at least is a kind of understanding and appreciation for what families go through when they move into that White House.
What did your kids think? These 4 children you had over the course of these remarkable years, what did they think of that mom's headed off to see the president every day?
I think my kids thought it was really cool that mom was on the television until the Christmas my parents sent us our first videotape camera, and we taped them all opening their presents, then in the afternoon put it on the TV, and suddenly they were on television. So mom wasn't quite as cool. They did like coming over to the White House to see the helicopter land. They thought the president was cool because they thought he landed the helicopter on the lawn. And the children also, because in the summertime, when presidents go on vacation, it's still work time for us. So the kids would go, when they're real little, to Santa Barbara. They were just the right age for Kennebunkport, where they could ride bikes and swim in the ocean and play with the other kids. And they actually thought all people live like this. You simply summered someplace like Kennebunkport, Maine.
Not a bad life. So you're following these presidents around over the course of these 40 years. So I guess, are you with Reagan in Berlin when he says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall?
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And it was a line, for reporters' ears, you listen for that distinctive line that kind of says it all. And this is way before Twitter made us do it in 140 characters. And the minute he said, with exasperation, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And he's standing in front of a section of the wall that was particularly picturesque. And I got to tell you, one of the most dramatic days, certainly the most important day I covered the White House in over a 40-year period, was Christmas 1991. The kids got up in the morning, had their presents under the tree. I popped the turkey into the oven, and then I went into the White House.
And this is 2 years after the wall has been breached.
Wall has come down, and on Christmas Day, I spent the entire afternoon live on the lawn at the White House as Mikhail Gorbachev in Russia, in Moscow, brought the hammer and sickle flag down over the Kremlin, announced that the Soviet Union was now dissolved, and that all of those satellite states, all of those Union of Socialist Soviet republics are now free and independent states, and he handed the reins of power over to Boris Yeltsin. That day changed the political map of the world. It changed the East versus West, the free world versus the communist world. It didn't end all the problems. It certainly created more problems to be handled by President George Herbert Walker Bush, who flew back on Christmas night from Camp David to the White House and addressed the American people. That day changed our world. It really was a breathtaking moment, and it was a personal thrill to be the one standing there on Christmas and seeing the President of the United States compliment Gorbachev's courage and tell the people of the United States that this was an important moment.
Did you see that your primary job as being to find out what's happening and report it as quickly as possible, or to be an analyst and an expert and to take a position on how well this is being handled or not being handled by any White House?
That's a great question. And I have been privileged over 40 years to be nothing but a reporter. I don't have to cast judgment on whether a policy is the right one or the wrong one. I don't have to say or to assess that this path that the president is taking is going to have disastrous consequences. My job is to tell the American people, this is what the president says, this is what he said yesterday, this is what they told us 2 years ago he was going to do, here's what else we know is factoring into it, and to put that out in as fair and complete and understandable form so that other people can make those kind of judgments. I have never wanted to be a commentator, never wanted to be an analyst, and certainly never wanted to voice an opinion. That has never been my mandate.
When you announced your retirement, President Obama said very nice things about you, and you're going away from the White House in August 2014, right? And it was clear that he viewed you, or at least the things that he said at that time, as a straight shooter and a fair and friendly and honest player. Do you think that was your reputation over all of time, as that was distinctive from some of the other reporters, perceptions of them?
I think because of the time that I left, the moment in history, the arc of what I've covered, the time I left, the media has never been more fractured, shattered, where there's so many places to get news now on any number, as you mentioned, channels, on the internet. The three major networks don't have nearly the voice they did before. But also, it comes at a time when Americans can go seek information from someplace in their own comfort zone. If they are more conservative and they just like Fox News, cable news better, they can go get their news. And they get basically the same news, but they get a lot more of what they find in their comfort zone. There are others who may prefer a more liberal take, and they'll go to Huffington Post to read the headlines, or they'll go on MSNBC, where almost all of the pundits are liberal. So I think I'm leaving at a time when the mainstream media is more and more dragged into a kind of a political back and forth. I did take pride, Doug, in getting 2 letters. I got a couple of phone calls from and acknowledgments from former presidents, but I got 2 letters, both of which are presidents who'd given very unhappy with the media, not always liking media, but both of them saying, promising me 2 things. One, that I had done a good job, and 2, that there is life after the White House. One was a handwritten from Texas George W. Bush, and the other was typed, but a very familiar scrawl at the bottom from George Herbert Walker Bush on Kennebunkport stationery, actually apologizing for something that had happened years ago. Long story. But,
what was it?
Well, you have the good stuff, don't you? George Herbert Walker Bush was so genteel and so polite. He came back to the White House on the day Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. He had gone up to Camp David to meet with all of his power players, the Schwarzkopfs and the Scowcrofts and Dick Cheney and Jim Baker and Colin Powell. What will we do about this? And George Bush comes back to the White House, lands in the helicopter, gets off and comes right up to the ABC News camera. Everybody gathers around, and he was a left-handed. With left fist in his right fist, he said he was so rewarded that even the Arab world was uniting against Saddam Hussein. And I blurted out, look at the front page of the Washington Post. Your good friend, King Hussein of Jordan, gets in his jet, flies to Baghdad. There's a picture of him embracing Saddam Hussein. George Bush turned around and barked at me, well, I can read. What's your question? Knocked the wind out of me. I didn't know how to respond. So another reporter said, well, what do you think? Next day, he's about to send Defense Secretary Dick Cheney to Saudi Arabia to offer 500,000 troops to dig into the desert. And I'm called up to, just outside the White House, outside the Oval Office, and I'm handed an envelope with my name written on it. It said, to Ann Compton, it's personal, underlined twice. On the White House stationery, a little card that said, Dear Ann, said you did an excellent job asking questions in our little press to and fro. I wasn't pleased with my answers to you. And under the initials GB, he drew a happy face, wearing a frown. The President of the United States writing an apology to the press. The note from Kennebunkport says, Now, about that bark, are you sure it wasn't just a little yelp? Oh, dear Anne, have you forgiven me? I think it's a very human moment from a president who loved the years that he was in public service and still watches with fondness.
And for the record, have you forgiven him?
Oh, yes, sir.
Has something changed about the ability to have some kind of a secure relationship between a member of the media and the president?
I think the relationship between reporters and the president himself can't ever border on friendship. It has to be respectful. I respect the presidency with a capital P. I respect the opportunity, the privilege that I always thought it was to be able to sit there in the front row and ask questions. But I think there is, reporters now are a little more eager to be a little more feisty with the president, to push a little bit harder. The day that President Obama said for what actually surprised my colleagues, he knew I was retiring and most of them did not, and he said, I'm going to call on Ann for my last question because she's retiring and it's been a pleasure getting to know you. And that he had held my little granddaughter, we have our first grandchild, and he had just held her. And he gave me the last question, and my question to him was, so why don't you go to Ferguson, Missouri? You say you're sending your attorney general tomorrow, who's African American. You're the one who has made race relations, and especially empowering those who have been in disadvantage, who've made it say, why don't you go to Ferguson, Missouri? And I did it because it's a professional relationship, and I appreciated his kind words, and I'm glad he was coming off the helicopter one day and picked up my little granddaughter, Olivia Catherine, and gave her a big hug. But it's still a professional relationship, and that professionalism, whether it's a time of crisis, whether it's a nice moment with a grandbaby, or whether it's a news conference, you just have to maintain it.
You were on Air Force One on September the 11th, the day of the terrorist attack, and the only broadcast reporter who was there. Tell us what happened that day.
It was such a non-news event, this trip of the president's to Florida. He was talking about education, giving the same education speech over and over again. Those of us traveling with him could recite it line for line. And the last stop was on a sunny morning where in Sarasota, Florida, at an elementary school where he sat with second graders who were going through their reading vocab skills. And then he was going to go into the cafeteria and give his speech about education and reform and No Child Left Behind. And it was a day of such innocence. And the way it works with the White House, because we can't have 40 or 50 reporters with the president every time, we have a travel pool that rides with him in the motorcade, rides with him on Air Force One, and then we take what we see in small situations and we pool it with the rest of the reporters who are waiting in the cafeteria to hear the president's speech. And a group of this travel pool, one from each of the wire services, one newspaper reporter, one magazine reporter, a guy named Jake Carney, whatever happened to him, one television, one radio, one television camera crew, and two still photographers. We're standing at the back of the classroom, and I was thunderstruck when Chief of Staff Andy Card came into the classroom, walked over, and whispered to the president. And I wrote it down immediately in my reporter's notebook. 9:07 a.m., Andy whispers. Nobody interrupts a president, not even in front of a classroom of second graders.
So you're reading the tea leaves and studying the bark all these years is setting off like crazy.
And you looked at George, we've all seen the video of George Bush's face, where it was clearly a moment of real gravity. We didn't know, standing in that classroom, all of what had happened. We had heard that there was a plane crash in New York, but that's all we knew. And so I went over to the side of the room where Andy Card had retreated just a few feet. I had covered him in his father's administration, George Bush's father's administration. I knew him well. And I caught his eye, and I made the sign of an airplane going down. Andy Card nodded and put up two fingers. One plane, a problem, two planes, serious trouble. President Bush stood up and said he had to go, went into another room where they had a television and secure phone, and obviously he watched the second plane hitting the trade centers. We come out into the parking lot of the school, and the White House press secretary, Ari Fleischer, comes to me and says, "Ann, keep your camera crew right here. The president's going to come make a statement." I said, "No, he's not. I'm in a parking lot with a camera plugged into nothing. You have to go into the cafeteria. Our live cameras are already getting that signal back to New York." They didn't want to scare the kids, but it was clear something horrible had happened. He did come into the cafeteria. He said, "It's a apparent terrorist attack. I must return to Washington. We will bring them to justice." They raced us in the motorcade to Air Force One, which is already, the stairs were gone. They got him up through the quick internal stairs. They threw us on the plane, slammed the doors. We rolled to takeoff, and then the Pentagon was hit. At that point, there was no way for George W. Bush to go back to Washington. I know he took a lot of flack for not going back, but you can't take Air Force One into a city where a major building like the Pentagon is in flames. We flew for hours on Air Force One, and in the bulkhead wall of every cabin, there's a television set recessed into the wall. And back in those days, Air Force One could get a real shaky signal from the ground. And we watched the first tower fall, and then the second. We knew we weren't going home anytime soon. We actually refueled it in Louisiana because the plane was out of fuel. We had to get fuel. But they still didn't know where to go. We had jet fighters on either wing. My job at that point was to ask Andy Card, and they let the cameras go up and get a picture of the president on the phone back to Washington. He had a couple of secure phone lines, but he had no way to do much of anything either. He was very frustrated. We land in Louisiana to refuel, and I feared that they would kick us all off the plane. And I said to Andy Card and to Ari Fleischer, "You can't have the president fly off into Wild Blue Yonder at a moment of national crisis. You've got to have the press there." Andy Card allowed me to get back on the plane after the refueling. So the only way I could get that pooled information back to the other reporters who were still on the ground in Sarasota, they weren't going anywhere for days, nothing was flying, and to get it to the broader public was to use this little Motorola flip phone, open it up, call ABC News, and they'd put me on the air with Peter Jennings. And in knowing that the tone of my voice, the way I described what we were being told would reflect what we were hearing from the president and from the staff. I explained who the president was calling, what he had ordered, that he had told us in Louisiana that he would they would bring him to justice. They will go after those who are responsible for this. We will show the world. He also argued privately that he had to get back to Washington because he did not want the world to see the United States government crippled. Remember, members of Congress went up on the steps of the Capitol and sang "God Bless America" to show that they had not been. End of the long day, he stops does a National Security Council meeting from a bunker beneath the Strategic Air Command headquarters in Nebraska. We fly back to Washington, and the president goes into the White House. Helicopter takes him, and for the first time ever, a second helicopter took me and the one other reporter, a print reporter for the Associated Press, back to the White House. We landed on the lawn of the Washington Monument. Beautiful golden afternoon. And at that point, my job as the pool reporter is over. And I head into the White House and into the filing center where all of my colleagues are now working. I open up my laptop and I see my emails. And the first email was from my oldest son, who was a senior at Vanderbilt University. It said, "Mom, my fraternity brother, Ted Adderley, was on the 93rd floor of the first tower." And at that moment, a day that was doomsday scenarios and a crashing steel and the need to get the president where he needed to be, all had a human face. And it was a handsome young man who had just started his first job in New York. And I sat down and I cried. And I think every time I walk up the White House driveway for the years after that, I felt not only the responsibility, the privilege we have to be reporters there, to let the American people see what their government's doing, but how important it is that Americans understand, even in the moments of greatest stress, what it is their government is doing, why it's doing it, and the important role that reporters play in that.
That moment you described a second ago when you said to Andy Card, the chief of staff to the president, you can't kick us all off the plane, the president can't just disappear into the blue on a day like today. I mean, in some respects, you're kind of giving him advice. You know, you're not just reporting, you're giving him some advice. Now, it's for your own purposes as well, and some higher purposes, but that tension exists all the time, doesn't it?
Well, that's a really good question, because very often campaigns will do something really stupid, like mount an important speech in front of a black drape. You know, he could be sitting in a studio somewhere. He should be out among people. I don't give them advice if they can't figure their own PR out. But I did think, in a case of 9/11 and of clearly how dangerous it was, that the president's words should be heard, and they didn't understand the technical end of it. So giving advice in that way too. But you're right, reporters shouldn't give tactical advice or even political strategic advice to presidents or to candidates. They get a lot of high-paid people around them to do that.
You also witnessed on that same day this incident that then follows around President Bush for a long time, and that is that immediate reaction that he has at the time of being informed of what had happened while he's reading to these kids, and the look on his face that was analyzed by millions of people and a lot of different interpretations, and some believing that he looked shell-shocked or distracted. Was the assessment of that moment a fair one?
George Bush was the one on that airplane yelling into the phone saying he's got to get back to Washington. He has to show the American people that this government has not been brought to its knees. And that was, talk about presidential decision making. The minute he heard that whisper in his ear, by the way, Andy Card wouldn't tell us for a long time, finally told us what he said to the president. Here's a classroom of second graders who had been reading to the president. And Andy comes and whispers, "A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America is under attack." He said he knew he had one breath to get the full import of what had happened to the president, because, Andy said, I didn't want him turning around and asking me any questions. He wanted the president to know what had happened, then the president could stand and walk out.
What a day. And then at the end of that day, the president does make it, as you described, back to the White House, gives this speech to the nation, which is not very solid by a lot of accounts at the time. He looks kind of shaky. People are wondering. And then, though, he goes to New York. We make it through that night, and then that is the moment in which the George Bush that he wanted to be emerges at World Trade Center.
Presidents are often want to go into the scene of a nightmare right away to show solidarity. Tuesday was 9/11. He went on Friday because Ground Zero was still an active search and recovery operation. It was still dangerous. The air was full of those toxic smoke. And so by Friday, he went in, and he didn't even realize that he was standing, when he got up in the rubble, that he was standing on a fire truck which had been crushed when one of the towers came down. And there was an old retired firefighter that had come in to help, Bob Beckwith, standing right next to him. And Bush puts his arm around him, and he starts to say something, and the other firemen who were kind of across the rubble were saying, "We can't hear you." Somebody hands him a bullhorn, and he says, "I can hear you, and the whole world will hear from us. Those who brought these buildings down will hear from all of us soon." Some smart advance man later went and found the bullhorn and made sure it is now in the presidential library. But that was an unscripted, unplanned moment. And it's like the Gorbachev bring down this wall. Those are the moments that you look for as a reporter to help the American people visualize and understand in just a little bit of a caption what it was the president was going through at that moment.
And it really is in moments like that that I think even as you describe it, that the media, which does attempt to be as detached as possible, not develop these friendships, as you describe them, with these figures, but there are these moments of giant national crisis where there is another dimension to the role that's played. I mean, the flow of information has been so democratized and opened up to so many other people, but we also see, and I think most of us lament, that there is less and less of the kind of profoundly inquiring, incisive, investigative sort of journalism that we have counted on in the past as a counterbalance to the ability of the White House to, whether it's through these new mechanisms or just good old-fashioned leak manipulation.
Well, I'd quarrel with your word of democratization, because I think while certainly the tools of journalism are in citizens' hands, and at a time of a tornado or a natural disaster, this can be wonderful and very important information. It doesn't come from anybody with any journalistic training or any real requirement to be accurate or objective. Tahrir Square. When you put the tools of journalism, cell phone cameras, you put the means to publish in their hands, the internet, and you give them a national or an international audience on any of the social media or on websites, you have now made citizen journalists out of untrained but people who are right there witness to history. ABC News now has a what they call the social desk. Take the Boston Marathon bombings. There were people tweeting and putting up videos immediately there. You never knew what was right. We have teams, basically young kids who are young enough to be my children, who are in there, that we do not put anything on the air that hasn't, where the originator, the original poster, the original writer hasn't been contacted, gives ABC explicit legal permission to use this material on the air, where we have a sense of verification that yes, we think this is really right. So we have given, I think a lot of us as journalists feel we have ceded some of this editorial ethics to citizen journalists, and that's not always a good thing, but we try to be careful to make sure that what we put on the air has some verification behind it.
Are you frustrated that the public, your public, doesn't seem to sufficiently recognize the importance of having somebody like you curating this information?
Well, I do, and that's one of the reasons that I think when I reached I was approaching the day that would mark 41 years as an ABC News Network correspondent, that I figured that because the news business is changing now, because it is done quicker, perhaps in a way more shallow, and because the network broadcasts on which I've been so proud to be a part, they too are getting into more kind of consumerist stories, more health and safety stories, more human interest, more feature, more Kardashian, it's a process, but I do think that the Americans who really want a long, serious investigation or an explanation of what Obamacare is really going to be like in this next round. Where did ISIS come from? Why are we fighting these people? A better understanding of why did the economy fall off a cliff in 2008, 2009, and what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? You have to go looking for that kind of thing now, and it's not as much in the mainstream media as it used to be.
Well, we had in your seat not long ago James Risen from the New York Times, terrific White House reporter and a reporter on the national security leaks and abuses by some ways of perceiving it. I asked him about the relationship between the National Press Corps and the White House and the ability of the White House to, in the vacuum, or what begins to be a vacuum of reporters doing some of the kind of work you just described, how do the reporters who are still there deal with the leak campaigns, which are not accidents really, and the ability of the White House to drive a news agenda, oftentimes making an organization like the New York Times sort of an organ of the administration?
Administrations have always sought out ways to get its own story out, probably through the most amenable news organizations. and they will always try to get their own side, best case scenario out there. And reporters are always going to be looking for the rest of the story, which turns out to be somewhat buried under administration. So that happens. It happens even more in campaigns. The messaging of a campaign really seeks to get its own message out there. And reporters just always have to be, not only reporters have to push for that more information, we have to work for editors and producers who insist on giving us the time and the airtime and the print space to get some of these stories out that tell the full story.
Did you ever deal with the dilemma, though, of that? On the one hand, all the reporters at the White House, everybody in Washington really, is under tremendous pressure from their organizations to be the first to report very significant news, to be the first to report what the White House is going to say tomorrow. And this system develops, of course, that the White House is offering information up. But if you can't really put that information, if you can't offer some assurance that, yeah, this is going to end up on the front page of the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or leading the broadcast at ABC News, well, then that phone call may not come to you the next time.
It's been a terrible problem for journalists ever since I've been in Washington. The newspaper folks used to object that the TV reporters got all the good scoops because the administration wanted to see it either on the evening news or on Good Morning America, or they wanted to see it on CNN 10 minutes later, and they could count on CNN using it to fill up time. More than that, I think the administration wants to make sure that when it gets something out there, it goes to where it will get maximum play the quickest. And frankly, right now, with the cable news networks vying for viewership, sometimes more eager to get things on the air than others, what we really do have is any administration can go and find ways to get the early edge of a story out. There are some who, the antidote on Capitol Hill is they could tweet something that would then override what the administration was saying. For reporters, it is always that gamble. You want to be the one to get the story, but if you aren't getting on the air or not getting in the paper, you're not getting those phone calls returned to you.
And then there are the stories that overwhelm all of that, where the manipulation falls away. For instance, so where were you when you first heard the name Monica Lewinsky?
You know, here is a dirty little secret about covering the White House. So few of the blockbuster stories come from those of us who were sitting in the White House press room. Remember, I said my job is to see the bark, be the expert for ABC News on everything that happens in there. ABC News actually assigned someone from outside the White House who could spend the hours and the time away from the White House to go after these stories. Now, we contributed. I got to some White House employees that were very helpful and confirming a lot of information. Remember the name Monica Lewinsky, ABC had the name from this, our fellow correspondent, Washington correspondent, who was not assigned to the White House. But until we could verify it through the prosecutors and the government people who were after it, the Drudge Report, a citizen journalist who has a website, put the name out there. It turned out to be right, but that was the first internet story. That was the first internet blockbuster, where internet leaks and internet running with stories that had not been verified went out and carried a story longer, faster, farther than any story I'd ever covered. One other thing, and you'll appreciate this. Look at the time, the President Clinton was starting his second term. All of his big initiatives were first term. He was down and doing events about whether you make uniform car seats all uniform for all kind of cars. Much more small ball than he was used to the first time. The economy was doing great. There were no American forces in combat anywhere in the world. There wasn't much news out there, and man, Monica Lewinsky filled up a heck of a vacuum.
And so, as you saw this story taking off through this new medium of the internet and racing away, and the traditional media trying to catch up to it, did you look at that and say, wow, this is an amazing new world, or, oh, hell, what's happening here?
When you're in the midst of it, all you're worried about is, who else can I call? Who else could help me with it? Who else who would really know something and would be willing to talk to me? And that's why the reporters outside of the actual White House press room very often have the time, resources to dig deeper and deeper and further and come up with some of the best, not just the sensational stuff in the White House, but the best stories on what is North Korea really doing, the best stories on where policy is going in the Middle East, I think, and on the economy. So very often, while it's important, we still need the foot soldiers at the White House to report on what the president's doing. It's still the kind of the center of the journalism universe. The reporters who are unleashed from the confines there, are very often the most productive ones.
In the 2012 presidential campaign, let's look at that for a second. In the course of that entire campaign, if you look back on it, I don't think we could identify, correct me if I'm wrong, a single story out of the traditional press corps that seemed to meaningfully change the course or the dynamic of the election.
And that's because one of the most important moments came from what appeared to be a bartender with a GoPro camera, just turned it on and let Mitt Romney talk about the 47%, and then it made the rounds on the internet where most of us weren't watching, and the grandson of a former Democratic president grabbed it, got it into it, and it became a really big story. But
it makes it into it makes it into Mother Jones, a partisan publication, and that's
exactly. Picked up on picked up by the rest of the media, and that's why I really think campaign reporting, the mainstream people who are on the buses, who are seeing the president every day, who are not sitting back in their offices somewhere watching it all on C-SPAN and writing their stories and making their opinions from there. Those of us who are on the bus and covering the campaign are still the ones telling you the basics of what you really need to know. And things like the 2000, by the way, in 2012, I covered the incumbent president all the way through it, and I wasn't on the Romney campaign. But now that we have internet and cell phones everywhere, I was in constant contact with our team on the Romney bus. So we could compare notes instantly on, he said what? Well, we've got this. And that's, again, where the reporters get drawn into really kind of nurturing a story and helping it develop during the course hour by hour in that campaign day.
So where do you see all of that going in terms of the role of the media and the presidency?
I think it's too bad that the media is now, the sources of information are now so splintered that Americans can choose the territory where they want to go to get their news. I don't think we need to return to the days where there were 3 television network newscasts at night and all of them were pretty similar because we all basically used the same material. I don't think we need to go back to a day where newspaper front pages were, pretty much the same. It is worth going and trying to find the professional journalistic output on stories to get the full story and not to be led off just with a quick survey of headlines on Twitter, on Facebook, on internet sites. I think I worry about the next generations coming along appreciating that there still are important places to get their news, and you can't get it all from one source.
It's been argued that the intensity of the media world that exists now, that is so intrusive into the lives of the presidency and the family, that it is so difficult for a president to establish a presence and preserve that presence, and that this is all part of a deterioration in the leadership of America. And that's so antithetical to what the Founding Fathers really thought about the importance of the press and the importance of the media. But what do you see the future? I mean, is the presidency something that can survive the media environment that we've created?
Yeah. One of the saddest quotes I ever saw, this was kind of mid-career, somebody saying, the best people never run for president, because they don't want to go through that. And that interview I did with Barack Obama, I was the only traveling reporter interviewing him on the night before the election, before the polls opened. And I asked him, are you sure you want to put your family through this? And he said he was, that they had talked about it, that his mother-in-law was moving to the White House to help. He thought that was good. But he had acknowledged that this is going to be something that changes your life. And as I said earlier, what genius really wants 8 years of this? I think it would be sad if it were true that the best men and women aren't running for president because they simply don't want to go through the difficulties, the personal and the exhaustion and the gray hair, which starts almost immediately, and the illegible signatures and the wear and tear it takes on you. But hopefully there are still enough people who believe that they have ideas and thoughts about the way the country could run better, that they will still offer themselves up to public service. And it's not just the presidency. It means the leadership of Congress. It means every state house in the country. And it means governance at the local level. We need good, solid, important, wise people in all those places, and hopefully an active, aggressive, competitive News Corps that's going to hold all of them to account.
We need folks like you at the White House. That's what we need. Thank you for being here. Former ABC News White House correspondent Ann Compton.